know your name, I swear I do. It's on the tip of my tongue. Sorry, what did you say? I've known you for how long? Your face is so familiar, but no name comes to mind. Please, can you remind me if you'll be so kind? Staring out into space, asking God to hear my case. Trying to think of all things past. How long will my memory last?
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. This is Lori LeBay. Thank you so much for listening today. For those of you who are new to Alzheimer Speaks Radio, we are an advocacy-based company providing multiple platforms to shift our dementia care from crisis to comfort around the world. We also help companies expand their brand footprint by leveraging our platform to help increase access so that they can get to the people who are in the need of their products, services, and tools. And I also want to thank our listeners for their loyalty and for their rich support and comments. We so appreciate it, and we absolutely adore you. The other thing that I love about our community here that we have is we have been extremely lucky and rich in terms of what you have offered us, in terms of your likes, your clicks, and your shares regarding Alzheimer Speaks and all of our work. We have had just such great accolades due to you guys spreading the word and spreading the information in terms of our show and the work that we do. And so with that, I really want to thank you so much. Because of you, we were recognized by Oprah as a health hero, by Maria Shriver as an architect of change, and then Dr. Oz as the #1 influencer online for Alzheimer's. Those things would not have happened without you. We share those accolades with you. Again, thank you so much. And if you have an interest in being on the show, I would love to talk to you and hear more about that. Please just go to alzheimerspeaks.com, click on the big contact button in the right hand corner, and we will have a conversation. I would also like to give a shout out to some companies that I work with. And those are as follows: Women's Alzheimer's Movement and Move for Minds, which is Maria Shriver's baby. Move for Minds, she'll be doing several different events around the country, and you can even create your own. Just go to the Women's Alzheimer's Movement.org to find out more information. And then many of you might not know about the Roberto app. It's a really cool app that measures your brain function through video engagement in games. And so you can, again, just go to our main site, alzheimerspeaks.com, and you'll see a big tab where you can even get a discount to become involved in that program. The Roberto app is what that's called. And then the American Senior Magazine is an absolutely wonderful lifestyle magazine for seniors with topics ranging from nostalgia, health, and wellness to interviewing and spotlighting notable older Americans. And it has a wonderful big print, so it's easy to read and easy to maneuver. And so check out AmericanSeniorMagazine.com for more information there. I am going to be in Colorado on June 5th. I'm going to be down in Grand Junction. I'm going to be there for almost a week doing several presentations. If you have not or are not familiar with one of Alzheimer Speaks' other venues, which is called Dementia Chats, I would really recommend that you check that out. And you can just go to alzheimerspeaks.com and go to our initiatives and projects page. It's one of the main tabs as soon as you come to the site, and then click on Dementia Chats, and there you will find exactly what that is. Basically, it is video interviews that I do with people who have dementia, and they are actually spectacular. Their insights are just absolutely fabulous. We have done all different types of topics over the years. We actually started doing this in 2012. But then I changed platforms in 2016, and we lost all our old stuff. I was under the understanding I would never lose it, and I would be able to take it with me, but apparently that wasn't the case. And so instead of being held ransom, we just moved on to a new platform. And so we do those typically a couple of times a month. Some of the topics that we have talked about are how spouses and care partners are impacted by dementia, and what the thoughts are of those who have dementia are thinking, and what they're worried about. We've talked about communication tips to and from those living with dementia, which was really quite interesting. There was one whole conversation about, do dementia experts and care partners really know what the person with dementia wants? And very, very interesting piece on that one. And it looks like Ajay Verma is with us. So let me see if I've got him on the line here. Dr. Verma, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yay! Well,
thank you.
Thank you. I will go ahead and introduce you. Dr. Ajay Verma is the Chief Medical Officer with United Neuroscience. Previously, he was the leader of neurodrug discovery at Biogen, where he contributed to the drug discovery and biomarkers development efforts, which is very exciting. And he has received his medical degree and PhD degree from Johns Hopkins University. So welcome, Dr. Verma. Thank you so much for jumping through the hoops to be with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, before we get started, I always like to ask everybody who is a guest on our show if they have been personally touched by dementia with their family or friends.
Well, thanks for asking that. Yes, in fact, it's sad that neurological diseases are so common now. I think it's estimated that about 1 out of 6 people in the world are probably afflicted with some kind of a nervous system disorder. So it's too sad that we all know somebody, and I personally have had, grandparents that we believed suffered from Alzheimer's. The diagnoses weren't as clear back then as they are now. And I've certainly taken care of a lot of people. I've spent, a good chunk of my career as a clinical neurologist in the U.S. Army at Walter Reed, and where we took care of a lot of active duty folks, but also a lot of retired military personnel and their family. And this is an all too common problem now, neurodegeneration in general, but Alzheimer's in particular. And it's really sad that we're making a dent in all these other diseases, like HIV and cancer and cardiac disease, and people are living longer. But unfortunately, if we don't get a solution to this problem, we're just going to have more and more people that are living longer with, a good chance of getting dementia of the Alzheimer's type.
Yeah. Well,
in fact, if you're over 65 now, if you're over 65 now, it's about a 1 in 10 chance. And if you're over 85, it's like 1 out of 2 or 3. It's really scary. Yeah.
Yeah. My mom lived with it for 30 years, so she had signs starting in her mid-50s. But for 10 years, she was just told it was menopause, and she knew it wasn't menopause. She just kept joking, "This ain't my girlfriend's menopause." She would say. Right. And lo and behold, when she did end up passing, and we had her brain checked, they had Alzheimer's, they had signs of Parkinson's and Lewy body. In a very atrophied brain, but after 30 years, what do you expect too? So let's talk about how you became personally motivated to research potential solutions. Was it because you were personally touched by the disease?
It was partly because I was personally touched. I was also very fortunate. I grew up in Bethesda, Maryland, as a child. Just living around the NIH and in that culture and. While many people strive to get in there, as a career move, it was a summer job for me initially during college. And so I was very fortunate to actually be exposed to neuroscience research very early on. This is back in 1980, 81. And I've been doing that ever since, and pursued that as a basic science, scientist, as a clinician, as a researcher, and now as a drug developer. And I've been fortunate, since 1980. It's been a long time, 2018 now. It's almost 40 years, and it's what the world has changed. We actually can diagnose Alzheimer's without doing an autopsy now. We actually have ways of classifying it and staging it. And some of the pathologies that we now know cause Alzheimer's, we weren't even sure what to call them back then, in terms of what proteins, what molecules, such that you could make a drug for it. And really, back then, it was really some symptomatic drugs to help, curb some of the damage that the disease does, but really nothing to stop the disease. And it's really been this last decade or so we're in earnest. We're putting in enough effort and money. Just for perspective, your listeners might be aware that we are making some strides in cancer and other areas. It took us about 100 years and probably hundreds of billions of dollars to get to where we are with cancer now. With HIV, it took us about 30 years, but we were spending as a country, I believe, like several $billions a year towards that problem during those 30 years. In Alzheimer's, the last year was probably the biggest funding year in the U.S., and it was only like $1.4 billion, and it's gone back down again, Yeah. So I know there's a lot of frustrations about why haven't we made progress here, but my perspective is really in earnest. We've just gotten going on what to focus on in the last 30 years. The tools have developed to allow us to peek into the brain and measure things and find the right things and follow the right things over the last 25, 30 years, 20 years. And how we actually do clinical trials in this disease. What stage of patients do we take? What are the endpoints? What do we look for? That kind of knowledge is only just accruing, these last 15 years or so. So I see tremendous progress, but at the same time, it is a slow pace.
Yeah, it has changed, and I know there's been even some frustration with new categorizations where people were diagnosed with Alzheimer's and then later told, that they had mild cognitive impairment, and their comment to that was, there's nothing mild about this, and they didn't feel like their symptoms had changed. But again, the way things were categorized had changed. But we have seen, I think, tremendous strides, like you said, even though we're way behind the eight ball in terms of funding and what has happened with other diseases. Given this disease has been around about 100 years. We still don't really know what's caused it, and we don't have a whole lot of information on prevention and things. What are your thoughts about the current state of development of new therapies? I mean, we're hearing all kinds. I mean, there's just such a broad range, and as a novice, we don't really know, what to get a glint in our eye over or not.
Sure.
It's such a broad,
no, I can understand. The brain's complicated enough, and to try and understand the disease of the brain, especially for lay people, can be very difficult. So my perspective is actually we have made a lot of progress. First of all, it's just perspective. We don't lump everything into dementia anymore. Just like we don't say, oh, someone has heart disease. That used to be in the past. Oh, they died of heart disease. Now it's like, well, they have hypertension or hypertriglyceridemia or hypercholesterolemia or arrhythmia or any number of what they call endophenotypes, subtypes of cardiac disease. Because that's the only way you can go and develop a treatment for that specific problem, right? You couldn't take a treatment for arrhythmia and treat somebody's hypercholesterolemia with it, for example. So I think that understanding that not all dementia is one thing, that there are causative agents. And in the same way, I think we're moving towards a place where we're no longer going to call these diseases as Alzheimer's disease. It'll be dementia with amyloidopathy because they have beta amyloid, a particular type of pathology, just like cholesterol, let's say. Or dementia with tauopathy, apathy meaning like a problem with, pathology of. but it's really another protein that builds up in your brain. We might find 5 other causes. So only that way can we actually get a handle on what we can target our medicines towards and target our drug development efforts towards. How do we measure that? How do we quantify that? How do we link it to symptoms? That's sort of what's happening in the field right now. So that understanding has been a big, breakthrough. The other one has been being able to actually track the disease way before it's affected anybody. And again, just like, when we're young adults, we can have our cholesterol tracked. We don't have any heart problems yet. But if our cholesterol starts to go up, hopefully we can intervene and lower that. So we'll ward off the disease. That's where we hope neurology is going to evolve. But we need those brain numbers. What are the numbers of a healthy brain? Or what are the warning signs of disease that we can track in everybody and try to keep, in check? And we do know some of those. I mentioned 2 of them. There's some proteins that we have our whole life, but then in late life, our brain doesn't clear them as appropriately as it should. And so they build up and form aggregates and, gunk, basically, that normally shouldn't be there. And normally throughout your life, or in many healthy people, the brain is able to get rid of these, build-up accumulations. It looks like in many neurodegenerative diseases that ability fails. And as a result, various culprits build up, and they're associated with different diseases. In the case of Alzheimer's, the main culprits are the ones I mentioned, beta amyloid and tau. And Parkinson's disease is another one called alpha-synuclein. There's a few others. So I think that's been a great advance. The ability to actually measure these things in a living person. Unlike other drug development areas, we can't just take a piece of the brain and look at it under the microscope or put it in a test tube. So we've got new techniques now to be able to image these things in the brain non-invasively, just by giving you a little bit of radioactive tracer that might go and bind to these lesions, and then imaging them and quantitating it. With that approach, we can actually see that the pathology is building up, just like cholesterol might be building up in somebody, 10, 15 years ahead of time. And now we're realizing that really the disease takes about 10, 15 years before you even have any symptoms. So you're cognitively normal, but you're walking around with this predilection of having, Alzheimer's. And then, the symptoms start to kick in. And then, you get worse and worse. And then you're not able to function. And then you actually get diagnosed as frank, Alzheimer's. The name of the game for us is that sweet spot early on. How can we find – the name of the game I'm meaning is drug developers. As physicians, ideally, we'd be treating people in their 40s and 50s, never allowing them to get that far. But now, right now, in today's day and age, just to prove that you have a drug, you actually have to have subjects that have some pathology so that you can affect the pathology and watch it progress or not. And that's where the field is right now. We're trying to find better ways to identify people that are at risk, better ways to track them. There's actually not a shortage of things to test. There's many new hypotheses that have come along. Even the failures people hear about are not really failures. They're learning attempts. If I were to stack up all the failures we had in cancer, people would, there'd be the work in Alzheimer's would pale in comparison, So we are making progress. I think some of those targets that people have been evaluating are still valid because the genetics tells us that. There's some forms of Alzheimer's that are genetically caused. These subjects get it much earlier, but they absolutely get the pathology. So we know what the molecules are. Now, there's a lot of science in how we do the studies. As I was mentioning, how early do you take somebody? How do you know they have it? What do you follow? And that's, I look at those as advances. Each time a study reads out, we learn more and more, and the next study adapts from that. And I think there is some hope in the field. There have been some hints of, light at the end of the tunnel, particularly in some drugs that clear amyloid from the brain. The most promising drugs that do that, by the way, are what we call antibodies. These are protein drugs that your body normally manufactures, but we can make them outside the body now and target them towards whatever pathology. And so we call these monoclonal antibodies. They're very effective. They're kind of the Cinderella drugs of today. They're very effective. They cost a lot, so not accessible to everybody. And I was fortunate enough to work on some of those drugs at the various companies I've worked on. What we're doing here at United Neuroscience is trying to revive an old approach to accomplish the same thing, which is to get your body to make these antibodies in the first place. And the big picture idea of this is that there's also many people that don't get Alzheimer's disease. So how can we learn from the healthy ones about what's happening in the not so fortunate? And so it turns out there have been a number of studies, and subjects have been found that are in their late 90s and early hundreds that are very fit, 2 standard deviations better mentally and physically than their peers. And many of these subjects happen to have antibodies already. They've developed these proteins to fight off these lesions somewhere along the way in their life, somehow. And some companies, particularly Biogen and Neuromune, were able to isolate these antibodies from these subjects and actually clone them, meaning make the same one over and over again, make the really high affinity one. And that's turned into a drug now. It's in clinical trials. So a drug basically invented by God, that someone naturally had and pulled out of them and turned into a drug now. It's now made it all the way to phase 3 and shows some promise in being able to lower amyloid and maybe even stabilize cognition. Now, if that's true, then how can we get the body to make more of these things? Why can't we, that whole concept of getting somebody's body to make more antibodies towards something is vaccination. And we've used that approach very successfully. It's one of the best medicines we've ever had. But we've mainly targeted it towards bugs, towards viruses, toxins. It's possible to also vaccinate people to fight off diseases inside their body that didn't come from a virus, that came from their own body. And if one could actually master that, it would be a game changer for the healthcare industry. Imagine going to the doctor once a year and getting a bunch of flu shots, and it takes care of your heart disease, brain disease. It sounds kind of fantastic, but it's possible to do it. It's been shown in animals, and it's been tried in man. The thing that's held it back is it did show signs of promise. The thing that held it back was safety. When your immune system is fighting off a virus, it wants to go and just destroy it by all means necessary. When you reorient the immune system towards your own biochemistry, you've got to be careful that you don't you don't get a lot of friendly fire and do more damage than help. And that's what our company has been able to solve, how to do this safely. And we're very excited about it. We actually have an Alzheimer's vaccine in phase 2 right now. We have other disorders we're targeting in this way, like Parkinson's disease and a few other neurodegenerative diseases. But, the reason we chose this approach is, let's say we're, wildly successful in developing a treatment for Alzheimer's. We make a monoclonal antibody, a gene therapy, whatever it might be. Those things are very, challenging from a healthcare perspective for a disease that affects millions and millions of people. If we had a drug for Alzheimer's that actually worked, it'd be a big challenge to actually make enough to treat all the people at risk, throughout the globe.
Sure.
So the solution also has to be practical and affordable, and we have to push ourselves as an industry not to just make the best science, which we have to do, but how to make it also affordable and accessible to everybody. So that's why the vaccine approach attracted me in particular to do what I'm doing with United Neuroscience.
Now, what do you say to, because I know there's a lot of people out there that don't believe in vaccines because they say they're going to put more into your body and than not, and they really feel that there's a negative side, to
it's
this
a good
approach.
Point. There has been,
what do you say?
Yeah. Well, I think I think vaccines are one of the major reasons why we've had the population explosion. Actually, if you think about it, back when we were, in the Stone Ages or various parts of civilization, we didn't live that long actually. Average life expectancy really went way up once we wiped out things like polio and measles and a whole bunch of other things. In fact, during the first decade of someone's life, we're actually, if you think about it, immunosculpting people to live much longer just by their vaccination schedule. Now, vaccines have gotten a black eye now and then, and there's been various reasons for that, in my opinion. I think, one aspect of it is when you vaccinate children versus adults, when you have a choice, when you don't. There's some issues with that. But also the vaccines itself, the material you use to vaccinate somebody differs tremendously. It could be a virus itself. It could be an inactive virus. In fact, most people don't realize that most of our vaccinations in life have nothing to do with going to a doctor. It's just from getting the flu or getting a cold every year. That's a form of vaccine. Well, if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. It's a crude way of putting it. But our immune system's always adapting to the environments we live in, the pollution environment. If it weren't for that, we'd be very sick, because we live in such a, vicious world, really, if it wasn't for our immune system protecting us. So vaccination is the body's own way of healing and protecting oneself. Now, the practice of trying to use that as medicine has been wildly successful. It's eradicated many diseases. It's eradicated some forms of cancer, for example. And so there's tremendous opportunity there. Every medicine has some issues that are associated with it. But, what we're talking about is vaccinating sort of consenting adults that have a life-threatening disease. And so, we have to take I'm not saying that, we certainly need to do more research on safety and tolerability. And we're very fortunate that our platform offers that. And I really can't speak about all vaccines, but I do appreciate what you're saying. But I think there's a bigger picture. Vaccines have actually been an amazing savior for the human race.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to throw that out there because I know that there are some people that are just very much, anti-vaccinations, and yet people are scrambling for some kind of answers and cure and prevention, when it comes to Alzheimer's and other types of dementias. With the vaccine that you're working on right now, is it specific to the Alzheimer's type of dementia, or is it broader based than that?
No, it's a great question. It's actually very specific. It's specific for only the misaggregated forms of these proteins that build up in your brain that I was mentioning, and specifically to the beta amyloid.
Okay.
Now, one advantage of a vaccine approach, as you know, is, we can use it as a preventative therapy. So imagine a vaccine that you start taking in your 40s and 50s, and maybe you just get an annual booster, every year to keep it up. And you ward off the disease. That's one thing we're hoping for or shooting towards. Another advantage of vaccines is that you can do combination therapy, which has been very difficult for most other, drug approaches, but which we know is probably the only way to go, because that's really what works in cancer or HIV or heart disease. Most people are on multiple drugs. And we know we can give, measles, mumps, rubella. We just give these combination vaccines to our children, and they seem very effective. And so we're also working on multiple targets, vaccine against beta amyloid and tau and maybe alpha-synuclein. Perhaps it protects you against all kinds of dementias. As you said, your mother, suffered for many years, and she had elements of Alzheimer's, a little bit of elements of Parkinson's. And, that highlights the point that many of these neurodegenerative syndromes are not very clean. There's a lot of overlap. But if we know the common culprits that are causing them, one of our missions is to develop a combination therapy to try and neutralize all of those if we can.
Yeah, it was interesting when I talked with a doctor about her autopsy report, and he was asking me questions, and we didn't really see signs of Lewy body, and we saw a little of Parkinson's, but she was so far along, it was harder to be able to tell, what was what. So she had a little bit of shaking and stuff, but as far as gait and stuff, by then she was, she was in a wheelchair bound and things. But it's very common that we hear.
And a lot of people, think that growing old and getting infirm and having all these problems is normal. It's not necessarily the case. There's many individuals that live very, late into their life that, are still very intact cognitively. Yes, you have, other problems in your body and you get weaker, your eyesight, your hearing, but it is possible to live a long time with a healthy brain.
Mm-hmm.
The longest lived person ever actually was this French woman, and Jean Calment, and she actually lived till 121.
Wow.
Imagine if you lived till 121. You could have a whole other career, right? I mean, you know, you probably have to because your 401k won't, last. But she actually smoked till 116. From 16
Really?
to 116, for 100 years she smoked. So there is something in the body that's resilient that can, and if we can just learn what that is from successful agers and have it turned on and the less fortunate,
Mm-hmm.
I find that very, very romantic and exciting as a hypothesis, actually, to go after.
Yeah, I'm not sure I want to live that long myself, but but maybe because I'm pushing 60 now, and I can feel the creaks and the cracks and the the muscle loss and it just kind of goes on, and it's like, when did all this happen? And it's just it's kind of interesting. But I wanted to ask you, about your phase 2 that you're in right now.
Yeah.
How much longer do you have, and are you still looking for people to partake in that, or are you just fulfilling the process right now?
Sure. Well, just for your listeners, the drug development goes in various phases. We first have to, find a target, make the drug that can attack it, test it in animal models, which we did. And the phase 1 is typically a safety phase where you want to make sure that you're not doing any harm. And you introduce the drug to a few people, so a small number. So we did that. We treated about 19 subjects and found that, unlike most vaccines, we actually got a nice antibody response in everybody. Most people don't know this, but you're lucky if you get a 50% response to a vaccine. Typically when you have a flu vaccine every year, we're lucky if we get a 30 to 50% response in the population. I think last year's was pretty bad in particular. But so we were delighted that our platform, because you don't want to miss anybody with something like this. So everybody responded. It was safe. And then the next phase 2, is typically to work out your dose. And you can proceed in steps. Sometimes you split it up, phase 2A, phase 2B. But the idea is to make sure that if you have a drug, you don't underdose. Well, you certainly don't overdose because you'll see safety effects, so you watch for that. But it'd be a shame to have a drug that you didn't dose high enough, and not see the effects. So that's the phase we're in right now. And the phase 2A is with 42 subjects, and that's finishing actually later at the end of the summer in September. So we'll have a good handle on where we are with our various dosing approaches. And then the next phase will be probably a larger phase version of that, where we explore certain chosen doses, and we actually look for clinical decline. Now, in the current phase 2 studies, because they take so long, typically they're a year and a half to maybe 2 years in phase 2, there's a chance of actually watching the drug do something. Like, does it slow down the disease? The time that it takes to see a change in cognition or function is a little bit longer because these things decline slowly. But it is possible to see some changes in biomarkers, some of these measurements of the cholesterol equivalents, if you will, measuring beta amyloid itself with imaging, for example. So that's what we're doing. We've incorporated beta amyloid imaging into our studies. And with these PET scans, we can actually quantify the amount of amyloid in our subjects. Okay. In fact, this technique is very useful because in the past, people would run all these big Alzheimer's trials, but, maybe 30, 40% of people probably didn't even have Alzheimer's. They had something that looked like it. Maybe they had depression or some other illness. Only by knowing that they had that pathology are you ensuring that, you're going to test your hypothesis. So the ability to do that has been a big advance, is what I'm trying to say. And we're taking advantage of that to select the right patients and to gauge the effect of our drug in a dose-dependent way. And, we'll keep dosing and increasing until we see a change in that, and then we're ready to basically do a larger study and see if lowering that with the right dose has an impact on slowing the disease. And we're excited that we're following some other people in the field, so we're actually learning a lot on how to do the studies, what are the endpoints, and so on. But we're trying to do it with a technology that we believe is a more, realistic healthcare solution for a problem like this.
Okay. Now, after you said you're in phase 2A right now, and then is there another phase 2, or do you go into a phase 3?
It depends on the data. I was fortunate to work at, Biogen previously, and they went from what they called a phase 1B straight to a phase 3 because their data was so compelling.
Wow.
So the decision to move forward to these stages, through these stages, is an important internal decision. Internal meaning within a company, because it requires a huge outlay and risk of resources, and so various companies take their own paths and their own level of risk and how quickly to move forward. In the end, though, we do have to meet with the regulators and satisfy certain expectations and try to achieve some pre-aligned endpoints so that it's a very transparent and obvious result. When something really is effective, it should be pretty clear and in order to get approved. So it's exciting because the field is also changing. It would be hard to do, for example, the typical trials we did back in MS or heart disease. Because, for example, in multiple sclerosis, there's a standard of care now. Everybody's on some kind of therapy. In heart disease, it's hard to imagine doing studies without all these biomarkers. And if you could change the blood pressure, if you could change the cholesterol, it's more likely that your drug's going to do something. In neuro, we're sort of evolving in that direction, and the regulatory agencies have been actually very open-minded recently in being more willing to look at biomarkers as an efficacy endpoint. They realize that in order to really see a difference in cognition, you might have to do a trial for many years, and that's very costly and risky for many companies. So they're encouraging the use of biomarkers, and they're open to looking at data that moves biomarkers, if it makes sense. And that's been a big step in the right direction, I believe, also for this field. But it's a very exciting time. I think I would not be, I think, the problem is growing, and I keep hearing the stories about, this other trial failed, another trial failed. But I actually think each of those is a step in the right direction. There's learnings from all those trials that don't get talked about that really help the next one. And we've seen this show before in other diseases. So, I'm convinced we're going to get there fairly soon.
Well, that would be nice. And even though once we get there, we know it takes a while just to go through the whole next step, with getting approval of once you have all the ducks in a row and stuff too. So it's a long process to get something to come to market. And but it's nice to see that there's at least a lot of activity. And again, there's a lot of people that would like to see even more, but then we need to donate more money, and we have to pressure our Congress people a little bit more. And and
I always tell my friends, neuroscience drug development is not rocket science. It's much harder. We've been sending rockets up for hundreds of years. The brain's much harder. But we're making progress. We are making progress. We've learned a lot, and I think there's been some great movements spurred by these diseases. In the last 20 years, there's a whole other way of researching now that's emerged, which is basically social network researching. Everybody does all these experiments, and they upload their data. Everybody has access to it. I mean, that didn't exist before. It used to be very competitive, my data, my result, And so there's all these public-private consortia that have emerged, which is wonderful,
Which is wonderful, because we were spending a lot of the same money doing the same thing, I would imagine, because data wasn't being shared. And and that needs to get out and needs to move forward.
And more people are participating. I mean, the real unsung heroes, of this whole effort are the subjects, the patients that volunteer to help us learn more about the disease, and their families and their caretakers. And it's been wonderful to see the level of participation go up. And, I think this is a really groundswell, and this next decade is going to see some major breakthroughs in this area. I'm very confident of that.
Oh, neat. Well, we only have about 6 minutes left here, and I want to make sure that we're able to talk to our audience, because I'm sure we've got people who are diagnosed and family and friends out there that want to know how do they get involved with new treatments for Alzheimer's disease. Can they get involved in the trials that you're working on, and if so, what would the process be?
Well, there's many trials, and I think of course, we could pitch ours and so on, but I think the field is changing so fast, and many new hypotheses will be being tested, and which is very healthy for the field. And so I think the Alzheimer's Association is a great resource. There's a place to go to see what is available, what people can participate in. So I would start there. Certainly, every company that's working in neuroscience and Alzheimer's has a lot of information on their websites. Mm-hmm. There are more sophisticated ways to find clinical trials through clinicaltrials.gov. Usually that's for researchers, but my suggestion would be to work through the Alzheimer's Association or their local chapters. It's a very active organization. They're very much committed to solving this disease. And there's also things people can do to keep themselves healthier. We do know that there's comorbidities, meaning other risk factors that can't be good for you, and certainly have been shown to be bad for progression of Alzheimer's disease. So taking care of your diabetes, your hypertension, your other health problems, trying to believe it or not, the most effective thing people have shown in trials is really exercise, So getting some regular exercise, it's cardiovascular, mental exercise as well. It's well known that your level of education is actually, can ward off disease. So the more you use your brain throughout your life, presumably, So mental activity. I wish we had better norms for people, like do this much, do these exercises, but just to stay engaged and, work out your brain, work out your body.
I don't know if you're familiar. There's a new app called the Roberto app, which was actually put together by some NFL players, and it's pretty cool. It does video games, but it can actually help monitor people's brain health, and they're starting to bring it in and doing school challenges and into businesses for teams, but individuals can do this as well, because I think we forget about. I mean, we don't talk about it enough, even though it's kind of our biggest asset in the body, and we just really we've kind of ignored it all this time. And I think computers and stuff keep our mind going, but again, I think that social engagement too is so critical with people, and I kind of worry about our younger kids because they seem to be pulling out of social engagement and being so online that it scares me a little bit for them, because I see the impact that can have on people. Right. And it's fine to go ahead and pitch your trial as well. I know that they can go to UnitedNeuroscience.com.
Yes, absolutely. And that'll tell them about our program. Now, we do have our IND in the U.S. for the next studies, and obviously everything we do is based on data. So we'll be looking forward to our results later this year and looking forward to the next phase. But certainly, please do go onto our website. Leave any questions for myself or others there, and definitely stay engaged with what's happening in the field. It's a very exciting time. Don't be left out, because there are opportunities that are emerging. And stay active and keep your mind active.
Great. Well, again, I thank you so much for your time today, and I apologize for
my pleasure.
The
no
mess
problem.
in the beginning with technology in terms of connecting there. That happens every once in a while. Again, you can get a hold of Dr. Ajay Verma, who is the Chief Medical Officer at United Neuroscience. Just go to their website, UnitedNeuroscience.com, and you'll be able to see all the information there. I again want to thank our listeners, and hope you will push this out. I will probably go in and edit the front half, so it's not me babbling quite as much.
Okay, all right, good.
And then I'll reload that up and get that out to you as well. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you so much, Lori. All righty.
Have a great week.
Day. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Everyone, have a blessed week, and thanks so much for listening. You can always go to alzheimersspeaks.com for more information. There you'll be able to access not only the radio show, but all of our other projects and initiatives as well. Thank you. Bye now.
Hi, this is Suzanne Newman, host of the Answers for Elders podcast and radio show. We are the North Star that guides you through the complicated journey of senior care with trusted experts in money, law, living solutions, and more. So join us on this station, your favorite podcast channel, or just go to AnswersForElders.com. Meet the Wayshowers who will help your journey go a lot easier.